of this first before I start. This isn't the original, well, it's not quite the original title of the paper that this is based on, but I tried to simplify it a little. So let's jump into it. Okay, so this is basically the structure of what I'm going to talk about. Give you a wee bit of background to this particular iteration of the Clavie I'm looking into, and then what it is, the fact it's one of the fire festivals, the Burghead Clavie, of course, is a calendar custom, and then why it's on the 11th. Again, this is taken a wee bit out of my paper, the original paper, that it's not a Catholic survival but a heathenish custom, and the fact that it's not a rowdy ceremony but very strictly controlled. And then we'll look at the Burghead Clavie's ritual properties, and then the FishermansClavie, which is kind of the main source of this piece of research, which is a new piece of research. The variants of that, the Ecclesiastical Condemnation that fishermen experienced around the Morayshire area, and then going down to the conclusion why fisherfolk believed in this and the conclusion itself. So, a bit of a background to this. It really is definitely part of my PhD fieldwork. The clips that you're going to hear are actually date back to that period of time. I did my doctorate from 2006 to 2010, so a lot of my research again is from that period, and again sadly some of the people you will hear are no longer with us, and it's sad, but it's a good thing that we have recording and that we have the technology to make these people's stories carry on living into the future. The first mention I heard of a fisherman's-clavie was from a family member. My dad's cousin, his maternal cousin Andrew Strachan, who you will hear. And I had said to him, and he was the very first interview I did in the Boxing Day of 2004. And I said, oh, is that like the Burghead Clavie? And he said, oh, yes, it would be. So that made me think, oh, have I hit something new here? And then when I went and did my fieldwork, now just to give you an idea as well, my fieldwork was in the northeast, so it was kind of Aberdeenshire, Morayshire. And then I was in Shetland, and Shetland mainland, Borough Isle. And then I was also in Lewis and Harris, out at Hebrides, and also in Barra. So that's where a lot of my research happened. It wasn't completely everything. I have been doing a bit more since, but this is where this comes from. And to me, it was apparent the more these fishermen shared with me about this thing that they called a clavie, that it wasn't the calendar custom, but it was something reactive. It was what we call in folklore a need fire ritual, which I will explain later on. So yeah, I thought, this is different. I've never seen this written about anywhere. So I decided to dig much further in. When I first started out researching this for the paper, for the conference, it was a folklore conference at Findhorn back in 2016. So, as I say, that conference, January 2016, it was the ritual year, was the focus of the conference, and the paper was given in the Universal Hall there. And then I wrote it up. It took me 4 years because life got in the way. And the paper, the actual paper about this research, was published this September in the Folklore Journal, and you can get it online. And if you actually want a copy, I'm sure I can facilitate that for you. So let's get into it properly here. So I am well aware there are some of you in the audience that know what the Burghead Clavie is, but some won't. So I'm just going to explain that while I'm at it. So it's a midwinter fire ritual, a calendar custom. It's, as Christina Hole describes in her 1960 paper on midwinter fires, that the whole idea of it is that the old year, with its evils and mistakes, is driven out and the new year welcomed. It takes place in Burghead in Morayshire, and for those that are not familiar, here we are. This is where it is. It's not very far from Lossiemouth. It's right sort of going further along towards Inverness, nearer to Inverness than it is to Peterhead, which is my hometown, although I'm in Aberdeen now. It has Iron Age origins. It's famous for having the largest Pictish fort in Scotland. In fact, Aberdeen's own Gordon Noble and his archaeology students have been doing a lot of digging there in the last couple of years, and even during COVID, to find out a lot more, and they've revealed a lot more history about Burghead as a Pictish settlement. That's one of the famous Burghead bowl symbols that was discovered in the late Victorian, early 20th century. So, and it's what I find most ironic about the Burghead bowl, and this, there were, I think, 3 different slabs with the symbol stones on, is that Solomon Ostig, the Gaelic college in Skye, uses the Burghead bowl as their symbol. And I've always wanted to ask them, what is a Q Celtic speaking college doing with a P Celtic symbol? But there you go, that's a bit of linguistic whimsy there. Burghead as a village, a fishing village, it was a planned one, like quite a few of the settlements on sort of certainly the Buchan coast and the Berkshire coast there were. It was formed in 1818 with a harbour to accommodate fisher folk, and it was regarded as one of the safest harbours on the Moray Firth, again having a natural haven. And in the 1841 census, the first census that again is the census that we're familiar with, records 43 boats in Burghead. So there are similar fire rituals or fire festivals, whatever you want to call them, that exist across Europe. But of course there are many still in Scotland today that exist and are still going. One example, the bigger Hogmanay bonfire in South Lanarkshire. Again, the Comrie Flambeau, some folk will be familiar with that. And it's a bit closer to the Clavie in that it's these lighted torches on poles that are a bit closer to that. And of course, sadly, we just heard the news today that the Stonehaven Fireballs is cancelled this year. I really hope the Clavie survives because it missed COVID and I hope it misses it at this side as well. And then Apelia. There are many Apelias in Shetland, but the Lerwick one is the one that everyone knows about, with the burning torches and the galley that is burned at the end of the evening. The Clavie itself has been known in the Morayshire area. It was common, apparently, to many of the communities in Moray and Aberdeen, certainly from as early as the 17th century. And the Established Church of Scotland began to register their distaste for what they termed an old heathenish custom. And just have a wee look about that, because this was one of the things that I sort of had to answer the peer reviewers on. That and again, we've got a picture of another New Year bonfire, Schwegenen in the Netherlands. They're one of the largest bonfires in Europe, I believe, for that type of calendar custom. So the kirk regarded Morayshire as a hotbed of papists. That comes from Robert Smith's book about the Morayshire area. And also, the fact that Moray had been traditionally a Catholic area and had remained wedded to the Episcopalian style of worship, it could be argued then that the Clavie is one of those traditional purification rituals which are pale imitations of those in the pre-Reformation church calendar. Well, yes and no. I don't think so, but there were examples going back to the pre-Christian Near Eastern societies in Egypt in the 5th dynasty, which takes us right back into Bronze Age times, 2500 BC to 2400, thereabouts, where incense or fire was burned as purification for particular gods or goddesses. And it was actually found in a dig highly publicised dig in the 1920s in the Holy Land about an incense burner being found, certainly of that earlier date. But if we look at the Bible, we've got in 2 Chronicles 34:25, during the reign of King Josiah, which again, much later on in time, that the Israelites are warned that they will experience divine wrath or punishment if they burn incense to other gods rather than Yahweh. The Roman Catholic Church, of course, never made any secret about adapting or indeed replacing secular and pagan sites with and ceremonies. In 601 AD, Pope Gregory the Great famously advised his missionaries that the temples of the idols in those nations ought not to be destroyed, but should be, quote, converted from the worship of devils to the service of the true God. That's from Simpson and Roud, 2003. And there is a good example of a pagan festival that was completely appropriated by the Catholic Church, Robigalia, which became the Rogation Festival, and that you'll find that in Burris, 1928. And they even used the same parade route in Rome. Robigus was the Roman god of agricultural diseases, so he was the god of murrain, and the whole point of the Robigalia festival was that the Romans made fire and incense offerings to appease Robigus, that he wouldn't destroy their crops. And what does Rogation do? Still, the Anglican Church follows Rogation days round about harvest time, and the purpose of them is identical to what it was for the Romans, to ask that grain crops be protected from blight. So again, and that's in Jude 1993. People fasted and prayed for relief from crop failure and marched around the bounds of the diocese, having the fields blessed. Now, rogation comes from the Middle English via Latin, rogere, to ask, so to supplicate. So the medieval Christians, like Roman pagans, were begging for a healthy harvest, just as the fishers of Burghead and the rest of Scotland were determined to ensure a good catch from the sea. So really, you can't sort of say that it's a hangover from Catholicism. It's far older than that. And then the Clavie, the Burghead Clavie, certainly is enacted on New Year's Eve of the Old Style or Julian calendar. So why is that? Of course, we've got a little cartoon here, it's sort of representing the infamous happening from the Old Style calendar when the Calendar Act of 1752, which was actually dated 1750 but was enacted 2 years later, knocked 11 days out of September. So it would actually... The whole issue was that Pope Gregory had said about 200-300 years before that the calendar was getting so far out in terms of the date of Easter, it had to be reformed. But it wasn't reformed in Britain until 1752. So that's what the cartoon's about. And you see the little sign there, give us 11 days. But that idea, which I actually explored in my full paper, was that the ordinary people were not ignorant and didn't actually believe that 11 days had been stolen out of their lives and their lives had been shortened. This was a misrepresentation of a Hogarth sketch to do with sort of some political issue at the time. But ordinary people basically saw no need to change the days of their festivals. As far as they was concerned, everything was the same. In fact, a good example from the 1880s in Somerset, in the community of Wellington, said that on January 5th, which in the northeast we call Alleel, Old Yule, that it was wicked to work on that day, as it is the real old Christmas day, and they would not on any account do so. And that's in Poole's book from 1995, Robert Poole. He's the one that actually goes and explodes the myth of those so-called calendar riots. What Poole also says is that the legislators failed to appreciate the effects on both economic and seasonal activities. And at the time, the Association of Free British Fisheries found that under this new Calendar Act, their boats were obliged to put out to sea and return 11 days earlier than intended. So that really messed up the herring and the whitefish season, particularly herring season, because again, a personal example from my own grandfather, Joseph Buchan of Cairnbog and Inverellichy, because he lived in Inverellichy until a couple of years before he passed away in 2018. He said that there was a fisherman from Belger who was known as Christmas Charlie Marr, because he was always last to come back from France, and he would be home by Al Eel. He was the last one, so that's why they called him Christmas Charlie, because he wanted to get the absolute last of the fish. So it basically meant that also those who were still using the Julian calendar had the advantage and could stay on the fishing grounds longer. And of course, with Brexit and everything today, we're still having this issue of who gets to stay on the British fishing grounds. So that was it. It's like, well, the fisher folk said, well, why should we go too early and miss the fish? We're just going to stick with our date. So you can really say that out of sheer economic and physical necessity, the Brochers of Burghead stuck to the old style calendar. Particularly when it came to the Clavie burning, because as I discovered, innovators who attempted to force the Clavie ceremony to be shifted until the 31st of December of the new style calendar experienced a rather stiff resistance. Again, a story here recorded by James MacDonald of the Glasgow Archaeology Society in 1863. He says that an attempt was made by the Party of Progress, in quotes, to burn the Clavie on the 31st of December, new style. The Clavie crew reacted by destroying the materials gathered by these youths. In fact, the youths made a hasty retreat when they saw what was going to happen. And again, MacDonald quotes that the Party of Conservation, shall we call them, began to use such threats towards the innovators that the latter deemed it prudent to escape the scene as quickly as possible. And he goes on to tell us, so strong were the feelings thus excited that the parties involved refused to speak to each other for upwards of 2 years. That's how seriously they took the Clavie being still on Old Hogmanay. And also, of course, it was seen as, from all those sort of 400 years before, as essential to the community's annual prosperity. A quote here from Mary MacLeod Banks in her British Calendar Customs of 1939, that the Clavie was seen as an act necessary to the welfare and prosperity of the community during the year about to commence. And it's also a ritual that's strictly controlled and has remained more or less intact in its style and its layout across generations. And you can see examples of it in Chambers' Book of Days, in MacLeod Banks's book, and Florence Marion McNeill's The Silver Bow. So again, to look at this and the difference that there are other fire festivals, particularly the ones at Guy Fawkes, that tended to be quite rowdy. So the Clavie is actually very much an establishment custom. I have an image here that was actually posted on the Burghead Clavie Facebook page today, and somebody commented with the man with his bare hands there, oh look, no gloves, what a hard man. So the Clavie crew, as you'll hear, are the only ones headed by their king who are allowed to build the Clavie and carry it around the town. Also, it's so far removed from the rowdy alcohol-fueled calendar customs found elsewhere. For instance, Ottery St Mary Tar Barrels. It's a Guy Fawkes festival, so again, it's the one for celebrating the defeat of the Catholic plot against James I of the United Kingdom. But it's actually a surprise that the Clavie is so well managed in one respect, because Scotland had been infamous in its pre-Reformation period for the so-called daft days of Yule, which the Catholic Church seemed to tacitly condone. Even right here in Aberdeen, we had the appointment of the Lord of Misrule and the boy bishop by the actual old grammar school in School Hill. And it got to the point that after the Reformation, the church said no more parades, no more plays, no more holidays, no more costumery, and definitely no more mass. But it took them at least 20, 30 years to force the populace to abandon their fun, which ironically had been a replacement for pre-Christian revelries. Now, again, to mention one example, in 1605, strangely enough, the same year as the gunpowder plot, the grammar school boys of Aberdeen actually staged a little riot of their own to protest about not getting their holidays. And it got to the point that they actually occupied the song school in Backwind near the Kirk of St Nicholas, and actually had to be hauled off to the toll booth and reprimanded for their behaviour. And several were expelled, but never again were the boys denied their holidays, because it was just too much of an upset. But the Clavie itself is not, strangely, a reaction against local establishment that many sort of Whitsun festivals, summer festivals involving fire are. Even today, at the very beginning, in this situation where the Clavie's being lit, the crowd actually gives 3 cheers. Originally, those 3 cheers were specifically for the establishment figures. For instance, in the beginning of the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, I should say, sorry, it was 3 cheers for the Queen, the Laird, the Provost, the Town, and the Harbour. Even in the 1930s, Burghead lauded the heads of state at this point. The Clavie King called for 3 cheers for the New Year, for the King and Queen, for Mr. Ramsay MacDonald, and for the Clavie. And that was recorded in 1937 in the P&J. Any drunkenness could be extremely dangerous for carriers of what's essentially a bucket of molten fire. The flaming liquid concoction you can regularly see trickling down onto the oilskin-clad crew's backs. Indeed, in 1875, an article, which I cited in my paper from a magazine called The Graphic, recorded the belief that the least stumble of a Clavie bearer is enough to destroy the carrier's equilibrium. Should he fall, the accident portends his own death during the coming year and disaster for the town. So there's no question of imbibing before the event, like the Ottery St Mary folk might do. But of course, the local hotel and the few pubs in the town are filled to bursting once the Clavie has been successfully burned out. The local fire brigade today follows the Clavie crowd, but it's the team of local marshals that steward the vocal but well-behaved crowd as the crew carry their chancy burden around the town. So the Clavie recipe, again, it might be something that you're familiar with. The first thing you need is an Archangel Tar Barrel. Now, Archangel is actually an imported brand of tar. It's not necessarily from the Russian port, but it became synonymous with barrels used for maritime purposes, and of course they were covered in pitch as well. The tar barrel is then fixed onto the Clavie post. It was traditionally a salmon fisher's pole or spoke, which of course held up the salmon nets. Usually made of firewood. That's an example of it that is in one of the museums. I think I saw it in a display at Cullen. And you also then need the staves of a herring barrel. These are fixed on to support the weight of the tar barrel. And you also need, as well as the burning peat, you need blacksmith's nails, a forged nail, and it's driven through the tar barrel using a stone. Again, forged nails and stones, that sounds extremely apt for a Pictish community. So the contents of the Clavie, of course, are originally soaked in tar, but nowadays more flammable things based on hydrocarbons. And the burning peat was traditionally supplied by Burghead's provost in the sight of the whole community, who then follow the crew around Burghead. As you can see it, this is them passing the harbour. This is not one of my photographs, but it is from about maybe 3-4 years ago, and you can see how the Clavie is made. There's the barrel, there's the flaming staves inside, and the staves that support it onto the pole. And as you can see there, that fire is actually, again, it's liquid fire. It is. I remember walking behind some firemen one night at a Clavie, and they're just laughing, because they're like, they're just thinking this is a bit insane. But again, insanity sort of tempered and carried on. So what I have next, wee treat for you, is a wee film that I took in 2016, the same year that I did the paper, showing the Clavie burning at its eventual destination on Dury Hill.
Oh yes! Please do some fire.
If you're using up the siren, you look where it's gone.
It's HD.
Oops. So if you've never been to see the Clavie, that's more or less what it's like. And myself and my friend, whose voice you can hear at the end there, where he's saying it's going better now. Because yes, the crowd screech and screech, burn it, and more creosote or fuel is thrown at the Clavie, and that's how you get these big whooshes of flame, which again is all very welcome at the time. So let's look at the ritual properties of the Clavie and why it is done, what its function is, why is it so essential to Burghead's success. Firstly, those burning pieces of barrel and the charred embers that are usually given out at Dury Hill or to certain members of the town, certain friends and family of the Clavie crew as they go along. In fact, if you go follow the Clavie, you'll actually see people have their doors open and they've got a wet towel on the carpet runner to catch a burning bit of Clavie, or they get it at the end. If you're not a native brocher, then you're actually probably best to go and climb up Dury Hill and see if you can get one. So it's these embers, these bits of Clavie, that are regarded as prophylactic talismans. Again, in the sense of guarding against negative forces. We have some quotes here about the Clavie from different sources. They're all referenced in my paper. The parts of Clavie are known as charms against witchcraft, averters of evil, a safeguard from the evil eye, and sure safeguard against all unlucky contingencies. Secondly, the procession itself around the town is thought to purify the atmosphere of any black magic perpetrated against the citizens in the year to come. Isabel Cameron describes this in her Highland chapbook. All the ills, malefic influences, the witchcraft of the year are being consumed. And that was in 1928 that was written. So we've got prophylactic and purifying. And most importantly, for an ancient coastal community, the power of the ritual was originally focused on the fishing fleet, as Mary McNeill describes in The Silver Bow. A rite believed to safeguard the boats from the evil eye and enable them to enter on a new year with every prospect of success. One of the routes that they would actually go down to the harbour and go along to the boats, and it wasn't so much bits of Clavie, but they would actually throw grain, wheat grain, onto the boats. And again, that was linking, I suppose, the rural and the maritime there, and ensuring luck for both sides. Like, again, you have the ba game in the Borders and up in Kirkwall in Orkney, which is all about getting luck to your side of the town. But this, again, was spreading the luck all over the town. And again, the very first time I followed the Clavie, and I got my little wee bit. And I remember the man on Dury Hill saying to me, "That's your luck for the year." And that's, again, it's something that's entirely still believed to this day. And that point is what brings us directly to the main focus of this paper, which is the FishermansClavie. So it would seem that there is another ritual, which is called burning the Clavie, that existed amongst Scottish fishermen right through the 20th century. As I say, I mentioned it, I already discovered it while doing my doctorate, and that it was more akin to the Celtic concept of need fire, a flame kindled in a ritual manner in reaction to a specific need. And of course, because it was recorded by Jacob Grimm, the German Notfeuer is one of the ways that it is represented, as well as need fire. Grimm himself, in translation by Stalybris in 1883, described a need fire ritual particularly as being kindled at any time a grievous murrain broke out among the cattle. So it was about purifying from disease particularly. So from that, again, looking at it in looking back to John Gregerson Campbell, who was a Highland minister and antiquarian, all his works were actually combined in this volume called The Gaelic Otherworld, which was edited and translated by Ronald Black in 2005. Very good volume. Campbell mentioned that need fire was part of the numerous superstitious observances for the seining of cattle. Now, of course, seining comes from the Gaelic soin, which again basically means to purify. Also, again, Notfeuer itself, Grimm, he personally translates it as forced fire or fire of necessity. Again, the forced fire idea seems to be making us think of creating a spark from friction, because again, no modern flame, no tin, well, it had to be done from either rubbing two sticks together, the old Neolithic way, or a tinder box, but not matches or anything like that. And fire of necessity is probably more accurate and probably closer to the actual German meaning. What we have to remember, of course, is where the brothers Grimm lived. When they lived, Germany was not a united country. They were all separate little states as well. So the German language had its own dialects at that time. So forced fire, fire of necessity, that's actually probably the closest thing to it. So getting back to the fisherman's version, it's kindled when the fishing is poor. I've got a couple of examples here, both from Peterhead, which again, as I said, my hometown, 77 miles southeast of Burghead. It's still known today as the largest whitefish port in Europe, and was in the 19th century a massive herring port. The ancient harbour was actually founded in the mid-16th century by George Keith, the Earl Marshal, the same Earl Marshal, the 5th Earl Marshal, who founded Marshall College in Aberdeen. And the ancient harbour, what was a haven really, known as Almanathi, was employed to create what we still have today as Port Henry Harbour, and the old village of Roanheads was at the site as well. And of course there were two planned fisher towns built around Peterhead, Buchanhaven and Burnhaven. So this quote is actually from my dad's cousin Andrew.
Wasn't get a nay here, and I would say one burn the Clavie. So if it we did, we could a bit of always dipped it in diesel oil, sit firewood, and run round the ship. And if the kind of stringers at the bulwarks of the boat, chasing the demons out.
So you can see, Andrew has told us there the reason why they did it, if we wasn't getting any herring, if we weren't getting any herring, to translate into English. He would say, go on, burn the Clavie. Now, the he he's referring to is Andrew's uncle, who would have been my great-uncle William Strachan. And so again, they Don't have any specific recipe here, they use what's there. Bit o' all waste, dipped in diesel oil, set fire wi' it and run round the ship. So again, it's the motion, it's a processive motion going round. What are they doing? Chasing the demons out. Now, Andrew was at sea, 1950s, 1960s, sadly he's no longer with us, but again, he's the one that first called it, burned the Clavie, as in a separate thing, nothing to do really with the Burghead one. Also, the Clavie should be burned when there is a perceived supernatural threat present causing poor fishing. Now, you're about to hear the voice of Peter Duncan, again, sadly also no longer with us, fisherman from Peterhead. The Marigold was his boat, if any of you know of the Peterhead boats. And again, this was all about ejecting, casting out the supernatural force.
Things were really tough at the fishing. Really had a real hard time. And sometimes we'd have been doing it Shetland 3 or 4 weeks and very, very poor fishing. And some of the boats were getting some fish. Herring usually. Would have burned the Clavie. They would put a big piece of a pole and lash on all rags and dip them in diesel and tie them up for it and sailed up and doing for a half an hour or so with this burning. And that would have supposedly chased away the evil spirits or omens that we were being faced with. It was causing the herring eating into our nets.
So yet again, he's described the why. Really tough at the fishing, very, very poor fishing. And the what? Big piece of pole and lash on all rags and dip them in diesel. Notice the fire isn't even wild fire. It's not sort of used any sort of traditional method for kindling. It's just put on diesel and set it alight. Of course, there are there's plenty supply of diesel on a diesel-powered fishing boat, as there would have been in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Most of them had diesel engines. They still have today, most of them. And again, the motion, although the thing was fixed, they didn't run through the ship, but they moved back and forth. They moved their boat, their ship, up and down that area of sea. So again, it's casting these supposed evil spirits away from the fish. That was specific there. Again, very interesting. Then, again, I say, and there is no need for a Clavie crew. There is no restriction on who carries out the ritual. There's no specific recipe, as I say. It seems to be rags and diesel seem to be the main components of the fisher's Clavie. Again, whatever is to hand, old clothes, oilcloth, sticks even. And the fire, as I've said, isn't wild. It's kindled using modern flammable substances such as diesel and paraffin, as derived from hydrocarbons, which, okay, they're a natural source, they're out of the sea. The next quote you're going to hear is from, again, another interviewee of mine, very well known in both his native Fitty in Aberdeen and Torry, where he lived up to the end of his life and was very much an antiquarian in his own right, and sort of told me an awful lot about what happened, sort of the social history of Fitty, as well as his experience at the fishing. And this quote, the context is that he sailed out of Torry with a Great Line trawler owned by a family from Lossiemouth, which of course is very close to Burghead. Great Line trawler, that was the same kind of trawler that my grandfather went to sea in. The Great Lines, that was for whitefish, like the small lines that the inshore fishermen would catch. Again, it was a very thick twine line that was shot out of the boat. Again, they might actually have a mechanical device for doing that, and with thousands and thousands of hooks on it for catching the great big Icelandic cod and ling and fishes like that. So, I'll let you hear Ted Monroe. His actual name was James, but he was always known as Ted or Teddy because I think he was just a cute little boy, and he was known as Ted thereafter.
If you want to get an oily fish, you used to say, Ted, when they get much fish, go on, look at an old pair of bricks somewhere. And we'll burn the Clavie. Now, we used to hear bracket at the ship's side. And I used to get bracket down and rig it up and get the bracket up and then toss the tins of paraffin and settle it, burn the Clavie. That would change a lot.
So there you get, again, you get the why, if we were nae getting ony fish, and the what. An old pair of bricks, the Scots word for trousers, from breeches. Again, remember Scots is a language. The Doric dialect that Ted is speaking in is very much our northeast dialect, and the Fisher version of it totally different from Aberdeen City or Toonser Doric. So again, he uses the phrase burn the Clavie. Notice in this boat, they put it on a bracket on the ship's side before they start burning it. And again, to me, that suggests that because the owners of the boat, the skipper and some of the crew were from Lossiemouth, they were doing something that was very common to them, which was the knowledge of the Burghead Clavie. So again, it probably explains why it's a static fixed version. So to continue, the variants I discovered outside of the northeast. The name Clavie is more common to northeast Scotland within the neighbourhood of Burghead, and in my paper I actually did have a wee look at the linguistic origins, and there is a word that was known in Bamshire that seemed to refer to a rush wick. I'm just trying to look at my actual paper and see where I got it from. There we go, linguistic origins of Clavie, yeah. It was in a 1875 paper by Arthur Mitchell that he cites a fellow antiquarian, Joseph Anderson, who suggests that Clavie is an old or altered form of Clivie, which Jameson gives as a Bamshire word, meaning a cleft stick for holding a rush light. The most common derivation of Clavie is the Gaelic Clavies, which means the rib cage, because it is a sort of wooden cage, if you like. And again, that would actually be closer to the Stonehaven fireball because it's a wire cage that the materials are in. But again, there's also an Orcadian word called Clivie with a K, which means a place where the tide splits into two portions. So Clavie can refer to the thing itself and the actual motion of it burning as well. So with that, again, there are specifics to crews and families rather than regional specifics. That's what I discovered. Most of them involve motion, as I mentioned, and the stationary version, which I just mentioned there, because it was from Lossiemouth, it seems to be echoing the Burghead fishers away from home. In fact, in some of the readings that I did, the boats were always recognisable if they came from Burghead, because at Hogmanay, well, certainly Old Hogmanay, they would be burning the Clavies from their boats as they sat in the harbour. So, here are some variant phrases, but it's still essentially the burning of the Clavie. Chasing or burning the witch seems to be something that was I heard more often in Shetland and the Western Isles. So we've got a quote here.
They weren't any luck. They were chased a witch or something. They were lads with a rod and put a rag with diesel on it, and one man was this going through every frame of the boat, the other fellow was the hammer after him. Yeah, chasing her out.
So again, what a contrast this accent to the Northeasters. David Morrison is a retired, well, he wasn't actually retired from fishing, he was still fishing when I interviewed him in 2006 or 7. He lives in Scalpay Harris and the Outer Hebrides. That is 200 miles west of Burghead, and again, we have got something, although again we're given the exact same reason, not getting any luck, but the phrase is chase the witch. There seems to be something that's a case of a symbolic destruction. He's mentioned about burning the rag, but also this is the variety here. One man with this was going through every frame of the boat, and the other with the hammer after him, chasing her out, the witch. So again, you've got symbolic destruction. It's like burning a guy in one respect. It's burning an effigy of the witch. And again, this was something that was quite common to Gaelic society. So from Gaelic society to Shetland society, we have another example of burning the witch, and you're about to hear from John Goodlad, a fish farmer from Scalloway, or Scalawa to give it its dialect name, is 300 miles north of Burghead, and he speaks about a man called James William Morrison of Burgh Isle, and I was interviewing people in Burgh. So again, Burgh now, the harbour is empty. I interviewed Bert Lawrenson, who James William might actually be a relative of, and their house was just above Burgh Harbour. There was nothing there, it was empty. Maybe pleasure boats were there in the summer, but it was empty, which was quite sad. But going back to the time that John Goodlad's discussing, it would be full of boats.
James William, he said about, I've seen burning the witch. I don't know if you've ever had that. Was if they felt they had a bit of bad luck, then they took a lot of straw on a stick and walked around the boat to sort of burn the witch. Now that was a real pagan sort of thing. And James William told me, he says, I remember my father doing that when I started the fishing in 1964.
I know somebody there has said something about the pronunciation of Clavie and Gaelic. Sorry, I can't actually see your questions as we're going, so I can come back to that if you want to discuss it later. But looking at what James has said, he has described it as burning the witch, same as what David Morrison has done. Again, it's exactly the same reason and a similar, so same function, similar construction, straw on a stick, walking round the boat. And John is even using the word pagan here and saying that this happened in 1964. So this was happening in the 20th century, in the latter half of it as well. So again, this is something that was in no way ancient. They might have felt ancient, but it was something they were still doing and still found effective. So, skipping on to the Ecclesiastical Condemnation, which actually, again, certainly backs up my sort of preferred view that the church really thought it was something devilish and not had anything to do with Catholics. So, here's an example. February 1689, and it's interesting that I couldn't really get any further back than this to find any examples of condemnation of the Clavie being burnt. Perhaps there were, but they weren't. Maybe wasn't recorded or had been lost. So there was an accusation against a fisherman who was a member of the congregation of the parish of Duffus, that they had burned a Clavie, paying a superstitious worship and blessing boats after the old heathenish custom, contrary to all rules of Christianity. So very, very clear there that it was connected with pre-Christian rather than Catholic. The Kirk session, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Established Church of Scotland, is the first level of church court, and which includes the minister and the church elders. And they dealt with basic issues of ecclesiastical and moral discipline. So again, this they felt was moral sort of indiscipline. Duffus is actually the parish in which Burghead is situated. Got another example here from Inveravin. In August 1704. Notice, it's not at Christmas time, it's not at New Year. So again, this suggests that fishermen were doing need for Clavies way back then. The act against Clavies, this was enacted by the session. Whosoever shall be found guilty of the foresaid superstitious and heathenish practices shall be proceeded against as scandalous persons. And then from Drenny parish, which was contiguous with Duffus, and that's the parish in which Lossiemouth was situated. In December 1705, the Kirk Session of Drenny charged people with burning their clavies about their boats and carrying a clavie or fire and going about the boats. So how would they be proceeded against? Well, the Kirk Session did not have the right to carry out physical punishment, but the civil court would probably back them up and carry out that punishment. So the first thing they would do is make that people that were charged with these offences, moral offences, had to make a public acknowledgement before the congregation in sackcloth and stand as many Sundays as the session saw fit. So again, that might be the 4 Sundays or 5 Sundays in the month. The session would sharply rebuke them and exhort them to serious repentance, and then if the civil court agreed, they would have to stand in the branks or the jugs, which is the scold's bridle, basically, at usually the Market Cross, and be seen with usually a placard on their, or holding a placard or a placard pinned to their clothing for what they were guilty of. That's what the kirk could do to you if you burned the Clavie. But the fisher folk themselves, and again I'm coming up to the end now, I've really found from my own fieldwork and antiquarian examples from the previous 2 centuries that it's so evident that the fishermen kept an entirely separate set of beliefs when they were at sea, out of sight of the minister. And as the folklorist Peter Anson, who lived in Macduff and who was himself an Anglican monk from Portsmouth, noted, a firm belief in the supernatural was not incompatible with a firm allegiance to the doctrines and practices of Orthodox Presbyterianism. So it was very much a dualistic faith that they have. Again, Peter Duncan, who you heard from earlier, says, "My father was a great Christian man as well. He was a believer. We'd burned the Clavie." And again, Peter gave me examples of other superstitious behaviour amongst brethren fishermen, Plymouth Brethren, who again one of the strictest Presbyterian denominations in the northeast, and they, as soon as they were on that boat, they were more concerned about what Neptune thought rather than the Almighty. Also, Ten Monroe again. This is again about how oral lore is passed down through the generations, irrespective of any authority. Ted said, "There was a lot of belief you got from hearing steady as you're growing up. Their forefathers had done the same thing, and you do a thing often enough, it seems to get ingrained in your mind." I discovered that in 2007 when I interviewed students at what was then Banff-and-Buchan College, now part of Nesgall in Fraserburgh, students who were doing the courses towards their mates and skippers tickets. They were 17, 18, 19, and they were talking about these things that, again, you would not expect a 17-year-old in 2007 to be aware of. But again, speaking in very broad dialect, they were very respective, most of them, of the beliefs of their forefathers. And certainly if their father said, you don't mention, let's say, cats at sea or rabbits, then you don't do it, unless you've got a death wish, one of the boys suggested. So really, the beliefs are very much traditional. It's, again, as Andrew Strachan said, a lot of them, maybe you didn't actually believe it. It was mere a tradition, but it was also out of respect for the family and the fact that fishing communities were very closely knit. And the biggest thing, which Gavin Thane, who is the present day skipper in Peterhead, said that although he was not superstitious, he wouldn't have taken a chance in neglecting a tradition upheld by respected elders. So, in conclusion, And that's Ted Munro on the right hand side of the life ring there, in the Fernbank, the trawler that he went on. So burning the Clavie was known to all as a ritual for getting rid of bad luck. From the 19th century, the commercial herring fishery involved further communal interactions. So that's how we get the Shetland and Hebridean variants. So the Clavie spreads out from the northeast, and the Shetlanders and Highland fishermen start using the same sort of words. Maybe they already did a version of it, but this again is something that seems to have spread out from the northeast, because they all faced the same problem: finding and catching fish. And if there was something that stopped you doing that, you needed a way to get the fish again, or to change the luck. So need fire, this is a need fire custom rather than a calendar custom, because they have common elements. The perception of negative forces affecting the fishing. Every example has some variation of getting no fish or having bad luck. You're performing a ritual in reaction to this threat, unlike the calendar custom at Burghead. The fact that it's basically make, do and mend, you use whatever you have available, old rags for flammable material. And there was no time to be specific. There was no time to have specific people involved. And you would use a convenient ignition source like diesel, paraffin, petrol, tar, and your lighter. Most fishermen were smokers, even my own grandfather. Fire was seen in every example as a purifier. And the FishermansClavie, as I have discovered, was one of many rituals in the fisherman's arsenal of folklore against unpredictability of the sea, just as the annual Clavie burning had been for those Pictish fisher folk centuries previously. And I'm going to stop sharing now. Whoops. And come back again. And that is it, folks. Again, hopefully you have some questions, and hopefully I can answer them.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiona Jane. Absolutely fascinating, and a very thorough covering of the field, considering I know that you wrote quite extensively about it. But you did very well to get it all in within an hour. Well done indeed.
And that's not all of it.
I know it isn't all of it. I'm sure a number of people have questions, and one or two of them have put them in the chat. So could you take Ian McMillan's question, clave or genitive cleave in Gaelic?
Clive or clave, yeah. Word for a creel. Yes, I think it is. It's a creel or a basket, isn't it? From what I recall, when I first learned Gaelic at Aberdeen Uni, always heard that it meant a sort of basket-like thing, because it was like the rib cage. Again, I'm just going to go back to my paragraph about linguistic origins and see what it says. Yeah, okay, so it's Ian Campbell of Islay defines it as coming from the Gaelic word clave for basket, and continues, certainly the basket-looking instrument in which the fire is now carried at Burghead gives some support to this view of the origin of the word. And that's, again, it's Arthur Mitchell's paper, so he recognised that in 1875, so yes, you're right.
Okay, well, if people have a question, probably if they just wave their hands we'll spot them, but if they want to be formal they could use the symbol on reactions. Doc's got a question, so Doc, if you would unmute and ask a question.
Well, firstly, I thoroughly enjoyed that. I remember your account in the Folklore Journal, so this is added extra. First of all, I'd like to take issue as a good Devon boy, Ottery St Mary, who said rowdy alcohol fuel. There's an element of that, but in fact a lot of the rollers stay very, very sober because of the you know, the effort of carrying the barrel as it increases, you know. So that was one thing, but I do take your point. And the other observation was you were saying that it was kindled when the fishing was poor, and that kind of reminds me of the attitude of the Buryman in South Queensferry, and the accounts of it further along the coast in previous years, where the same thing happened. So they created their own Buryman, or a scapegoat, that they dragged through the streets, and the fishing became better.
Yeah, that's Buryman is yet another reaction to
we're not hearing that reply. Somebody's echoing the microphone. What I'm going to do is mute everyone, and then if we unmute, Fiona, Jane, if you unmute yourself and just give your answer again to Doc, what Doc points Doc was making.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard of the Burymen, but I didn't actually go down into sort of the Lothian area to do any interviews, but I'm aware of it. And again, a lot of what was in my thesis was about all the different ways that they used to sort of react to things.
Yeah. And if I could, we got echo again. If I could just sort of put in a little comment there that in fact, having spent time with the Clavie crew before the burning of the Clavie on many occasions, some of them do take alcohol before, I assure you. Maybe they use it as a form of anaesthetic, let's put it that way, so that if they get burnt, they don't. It doesn't bother them too much.
Yes, well, again, the fact that it was bad luck to fall over and that you could be signing your own death.
No, I think you're absolutely right. They're very, very careful, but that doesn't mean that they don't take any alcohol.
Oh well, that's news.
Okay, do we have another question, please?
James, Sclavie?
Yes, okay. If you would unmute and ask your question.
It's more of an observation than a question. I was looking into the Burghead Clavie a few years back, basically to sort of write up some captions for some photos I'd taken of it. And on the bit about them respecting authority and church condemnation, I found something, and I cannot remember where I found it, that basically, time of the disruption, the Free Kirk minister in Burghead came out all condemnatory about it, and that the spot to this day that they actually light the Clavie is the old Free Church manse dyke. And that strikes me as being then basically saying, right, we're putting the Clavie down here, we're lighting it on your dyke, and, you know, stop trying to interfere with us.
Well, the thing is, I should have qualified what I meant by authority. I meant civil authority, because again, I included it because it was one of the peer reviewers had commented, and they were talking about, again, they were using a lot of examples of English rituals, and it's like, well, one, Scotland, England, two separate countries, and two, this reacting against the laird and all of this. That was more it. But yeah, the church has always been sort of, don't spoil our fun, or we will, again, like the grammar school boys in Aberdeen in the 17th century. Yeah, so it's a great point, and I'm so glad you told me that, James. I'm going to remember that one in future about the wall.
Yes, thank you, James. That was very good. Have we anyone else waving a hand? Anyone I haven't spotted? What about somebody raising a hand? Anyone? Can I ask you, Fiona, Jane, if there are any Scandinavian or Norwegian equivalents to burning the Clavie that you have picked up on?
Short answer, no, not that I'm aware of. That bonfire, the New Year bonfire in the Netherlands, that's the first again that I've looked into that. The main Scandinavian stuff seemed to be more about the people, 19th century antiquarians, sort of comparing not being aware of the Pictish stuff and basically saying, oh, it's all Norse stuff, it's Norse remains. But I've not looked into it to see if they do anything. But I would think if I'd gone a bit further into the Shetland stuff, I might have been able to link over. But it's just not something that I was able to get any field work
And
done.
do you think anybody has carried this forward into the 21st century?
In terms of the fishermen, I wouldn't think so, but again, I don't know for definite. I did get, and this again would have been just into the 2000s, on Facebook. I got a comment from someone who, again, I quote him in my thesis, and he had been at sea, and I can't even remember where. If it was a Morayshire boat, it might just have been. And this young man, he was newly on board the boat, and again, they weren't getting any fish, and they're like, oh, we can't find any fish. It's like, this is, again, remembering they have plotters and everything to find fish. And the person who'd been commenting to me had this new tweed cap, and they said, like, it's your cap, that's a new thing on the boat, that's got to go. And they burned his cap to improve the luck, and he told me that, and that would have been in the 2000s. So again, there's something, maybe it was just a bit of a sort of initiation thing for him, but the fact that it was burnt, and in connection with that they thought his cap was bad luck. So I don't know, that's just one little example.
Yeah.
Need more evidence.
Have you had a chat with the Port Soy folk who are doing all the wooden boat restoration work as well as the boat festival about the beliefs? Have any of them, I wondered if you'd had any feedback from them?
I've never able to get any connection with them.
Well, if you need it, I can give you it.
Great stuff.
If you would like it, yeah.
Now, I think Maeve was going to ask a question. Maeve McDowell, I saw her hand up earlier.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Fiona. That was very interesting, and I've been lucky enough to be at Burghead on several occasions for the burning of the Clavie. But I was particularly interested in the little live clips you had from your field work of some of the old guys' comments, about chasing the witch and whatnot. And I was wondering whether you were currently recording any views from fisherfolk up in that part of the world, and particularly recording what younger people have to say.
Well, I did a wee bit about 5 years ago, but again, to say, life's kind of got in the way at the moment, and I'm I was running my business as a tour guide, and like post-COVID, I'm now back at college doing an HND, so I haven't had any time to do field work. I've been involved in heritage projects, but where I've had a chance, occasionally I interviewed, if you ever saw, well, it was on Trawlerman as well, but the 2004 or 2003 BAFTA winning BBC documentary called Gutted. The crew that were on that, one of the they were local to the Fraserburgh area, the Wests. I did go and interview, I actually interviewed them separately. I never interviewed the dad, Sandy, but I got Xander, the son, and his son, Danny, and that would have been 2015, 2016, I spoke to them, and another Fraserburgh fisherman, Martin, that I spoke to. So I've got a couple, but again, my life is going a different direction at the moment. But I always keep an eye, and what's really good now, which is going to be very useful for gathering information, one element that I wanted to look at that I didn't was fisher women, as in women skippers, and I have two that I am friends with on social media, and one of them lives in Norfolk, and on her Instagram a couple of weeks ago she was having all sorts of technical problems with her and her husband's boat, and she said, okay guys, what's the superstitions you've heard of? And I thought, oh yes. And I contacted her and I said, Ashley, can I interview you? And she's like, she has agreed, so hopefully I'll get her in the holidays. So again, I want to sort of broad out into fisher women, English fisher folk, and again, yeah, get that next generation, because the boys that I interviewed in 2007, again, will all be up and married now, and I'd like to get their family if possible, so we shall see.
Right, well, I think we're probably coming to the point where we need to wind up, Fiona Jane,
Sure.
And everyone who's listening. Is there just one final question before we close down?
Oh, Ian?
Yes, Ian, if you would like to unmute.
I just wondered whether you mentioned earlier on about it used to be the provost took along a peat to ignite the Clavie. I've been at the ceremony and I can't remember, or probably couldn't see who actually ignited it and how you ignited it. So is there any superstition that you've not to use a match or
Originally
nowadays?
they didn't, but I suppose I think they kind of have conveniently sort of left that bit out now because it's just easier, because again you can smell the creosote and the diesel, and they're again in my film when you saw it going whoosh like that again, that's throwing whatever fuel it is at it. So I think that's something that they no longer do just for convenience, but certainly in the 19th century it was supposed to be a peat from the Provost fire.
About 10 years ago, when I was in the Clavie King's house, I saw them take an ember from the fire.
Ah, great. Yeah.
On their fire. Margaret, you've got your hand up. Or you've got a raised hand. Margaret Bennett. You need to...
Yes. Yeah, just to say that, yes, it's been more than 20 years ago since I was there, but a lit peat was taken from the house that was fairly near. Now, I don't know whose house it was, down near the wall where they lighted. It was dark, it was about 4 o'clock. And, well, lit, I say lit, but it's really smouldering because peat doesn't flame like wood does, and that smouldering peat was dropped into the Clavie on the tar, and the whole lot went poof, it was ignited, and away they went. But I don't know who the person was, whether it was the provost. I didn't get a chance to find that out, but it was certainly out of a living fire, which of course was a tradition as well, to take a light from a living fire.
Oh, well, they must still do, but yeah, I mean, I don't think they have a provost of Burghead anymore, but certainly pre the Regionalisation Act, they would have. But I'm glad to hear that they still.
Yes,
do.
what is absolutely fascinating is the fact that these things do change, they do move on, there are new questions to be asked all the time, and no more so than how things have coped during the time of the pandemic. So there's plenty more research to be done, isn't there, Fiona Jane?
Absolutely, if I get the time.
Can I ask everybody if they're able to unmute so that we can give Fiona Jane a warm round of applause? And I will be in touch and fill you in about our programme after New Year, after Old Eel, okay, and after Old Hogmanay probably as well. And let's fingers crossed that things start improving in the new year, because they ain't at the moment. Oh dear, they ain't. And yeah, and thank you very much for joining us this evening, everyone. You've been a great audience, and I'm sure Fiona Jane has been really thrilled by the super questions she's been given and comments that have been made. Okay, right, well, I'm going to leave you to open up, and if you want to say hi to a friend or two, the the airwaves will be open. It'll sound chaotic, and I'll close it down in about 2 minutes.
Right. Margaret, I've just sent you a message.
Okay, everyone is being polite.
Thank you, Fiona, Jane, and thank you, everyone.
Yes. Fine to see you, Charlie. I recognise your face.
Oh, it's never forgotten, eh?
Yes.